This is Franklin Rye. Welcome back to Political Spirits, where we still believe that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. For a democracy to function, we must be able to talk about our political beliefs. Compromise is not a requirement. Our discussions could change your views, or your views could stay the same. Either way, that's fine, so long as we talk. So what are we going to talk about this week? Well, let's talk about what happened last week with devices that appeared to be rudimentary explosive devices being sent to multiple Democrat office holders and former office holders. As we all know, the alleged perpetrator has been apprehended. If he is convicted, I hope he receives a very long sentence. In response to the attempted bombings, President Trump stated that in these times, we have to unify. At Political Spirits, we stand with him in that commitment. As I've been saying since the pilot episode of this podcast, Americans should always be able to talk to each other about what they believe, including political beliefs. It is that dialogue which helps us move forward, together, as a country. We don't have to change our views, but we should always be willing to talk to our fellow Americans so that we each understand each other's views. And frankly, you don't really understand your own until you've compared them to those of others who steadfastly believe their own opinions. In that way, we can unify in our commitment to each other and our country. Some might say that it's a bad idea to talk politics when we are so divided. I say the opposite is true. If we refuse to talk about these subjects, we move away from the belief that debate and discussion is a good thing. Given how serious some of these subjects are, and given how heartfelt the beliefs of their proponents and opponents, if we don't talk about them, some among us who are misguided may be encouraged to believe that violence rather than discussion is the appropriate approach to take. We can never let that happen. Incidentally, from the level of coverage given the mail bombing or apparent explosive device mailing incidents, you would think that they are the only recent instance of attempted violence or threats of violence against politicians. In reality, there have been multiple incidents going back for a couple of years, including the shooting at the Republican congressional baseball team practice. A Democrat who was extremely opposed to President Trump and who had volunteered on the Bernie Sanders campaign specifically targeted a baseball practice by congressional Republicans. Thankfully, in large part because of the prompt action of the Capitol and Alexandria police, he was not able to kill anyone. However, he did manage to shoot a police officer in the ankle and a congressional aide in the leg, to shoot a business representative multiple times, and to so severely wound Congressman Steve Scalise that he nearly died. As the Virginia Attorney General concluded, Hodgkinson was fueled by rage against Republican legislators, and he labeled the incident an act of terrorism. CNN reported that Hodgkinson fired at least 70 rounds. The police officers firing back at him kept him pinned down and likely prevented the incident from becoming a massacre. How bad could it have been? Well, there were 20 House members and 2 senators present. Steve Scalise, the congressman who was shot and nearly died, was the number 3 ranking House Republican. Multiple prominent House members were present, as well as Senators Rand Paul and Jeff Flake. Let's go more recent. Only last month, letters containing ground-up castor beans tested positive for the deadly poison ricin, which is made from castor beans, when they were intercepted on the way to, among others on the right, or the current administration, President Trump himself and Secretary of Defense James Mattis. That's right, President Trump himself was targeted, as well as the Secretary of Defense. And how much coverage has that received? Not very much. Why not? I believe it's because the media can't blame it on President Trump. Frankly, even the baseball game shooting in the end may receive less coverage than the mailing of the apparent pipe bombs. Why? I believe it's because the media couldn't blame the shooting on President Trump. Next topic. Some personal observations about politicians I've met over the years. During the years that I handled government relations, I met a number of elected officials. Frankly, some I liked quite a bit, and others not so much. But there was no doubt there were some interesting differences between them. The one thing that I could say was a constant between all of them is that they never wanted large documents to review. The old joke that says, if I had more time, I would have written something shorter, holds true here. You really have to put in the time to pare down presentations to the bare minimum to get the attention of elected officials. In the view of most of them, if an argument can be made well in 10 pages, it can be made better in 10 bullet points. One thing that I've taken away from all those years of lobbying is to keep it simple. Some people put together presentations on legislative issues that look like dissertations with complex titles that seem designed for delivery to a panel of professors. Mine always made extremely logical but brief arguments and always had the simplest of titles. The title was almost always something like, Why Blank is Bad for Consumers, or Why Blank is Bad for South Carolina, for example. Never forget that you're not trying to impress the elected official, you're trying to convince the elected official. So what are some personal observations about the politicians I've had to deal with over the years? Let's start with the positive. Who was the congressman or senator who I found to be the most genuine, the most like someone you'd want to have as your next-door neighbor? Well, that was Senator Joe Lieberman. He was the Democrat senator from Connecticut who served from 1989 until 2013. He also ran for the vice presidency on the ticket with Al Gore in 2000. Lieberman ran for the Senate in the general election in 2006 as an independent. So why did I like Lieberman? Because frankly, he seemed the most like somebody who was actually being himself. And not only was that persona genuine, but also it was likable. He didn't show a lot of flash. He was the perfect guy to invite to a family barbecue. So if Joe Lieberman was the most genuine congressman or senator that I ever met, who was the most fake? Now, asking who's the most fake among a group of politicians is a bit like asking what is the most unhealthy item on the Taco Bell menu. That's a hard one to narrow down. But in my experience, the XXL grilled stuffed burrito of fake politicians was Congressman Dick Gephardt. He represented Missouri in Congress from 1977 to 2005. He also pursued the Democrat nomination for president in the 1988 campaign and in 2004. Perhaps I'm being a bit unfair here. I don't have extensive experience dealing with Dick Gephardt, but that is part of what made him seem so fake. I don't think I have ever had such a reaction to an individual from the moment I met him, comparable to that which I had with Dick Gephardt. From the first handshake, the impression that I had was almost like he was the beta test version for artificial intelligence in an elected official. They'd already conducted the alpha test and worked out a few of the kinks, and now they were moving on to the beta test. The beta test would, of course, be nowhere near ready to release with the politician being operated by artificial intelligence. Therefore, that beta test would seem artificial, like somebody literally was pushing a button in the background to deploy for you a very large smile, no doubt practiced extensively in displaying the utmost in sophisticated dental work. From the moment that smile was deployed, every statement seemed like it was being directed by an advisor or team of advisors occupying the body of Dick Gephardt. You know what? Maybe he was actually one of the Arquillians from the movie Men in Black. If I had listened more closely, maybe he was actually saying, "The galaxy is on Orion's belt." You never know. I'll give you one more observation regarding a senator or congressman from back when I handled government relations. We all know that most politicians are at least somewhat adept at speaking for long periods on a moment's notice, and some are very good at it. I remember the time I first met John Kerry. He was a senator at the time. I attended a private speech that he gave, and then there was a question and answer session afterwards. Now, we've all been to speeches where it comes time to answer questions, and there aren't enough questions being asked. It's always an uncomfortable moment, and you wonder if the event is going to end early for lack of sufficient Q&A. For John Kerry, that was no problem. As each question was being answered, he would say what he was going to say, and then you could see him starting to slow down because he was wrapping up his response. And as he would do so, he would look around the room to see if anybody had their hand up or was otherwise preparing to ask a question. If nobody was, he'd speed right back up and just continue to answer the prior question for however long it took until finally somebody would raise their hand or otherwise signal that they had a question. I'm convinced that he literally could have gone on forever in response to a single question if he needed to. When I was a kid, I used to claim that I could sit and eat pancakes continuously without ever stopping, so long as I didn't eat them too quickly. All things considered, being able to talk endlessly in response to a single question is a more impressive, not to mention healthier, talent. Next topic. What has happened with CNN is a shame. When I was a young man, I used to come home from college, and if the weather wasn't too warm, my parents would have the windows open. My father would listen to CNN with the volume turned so loud that if I had the car windows down, I could hear it as I was driving down the street even before I reached the house. He was every bit as much of a news junkie as I am, and CNN was a revelation for him. Young people now are so used to news sources being virtually unlimited and available round the clock that they don't realize how revolutionary CNN was when they introduced the concept of 24/7 news. I would sit with him and watch it as well. He has long since passed away, but I have no doubt that he would be as frustrated as I am with what has happened to CNN. As you know from Episode 2, Bursting the Bubble, I believe that the news portion, not the opinion portion, of Fox News is not nearly as far to the right as many people believe. But regardless of that fact, there is widespread belief that the news portion of Fox News leans very much to the right. That presented an opportunity for CNN to truly hold the middle, to actually live up to what it at times claims to be, which is a down-the-middle, true news organization. For some time, I believed that CNN could in fact move in that direction and actually claim the mantle of the center. Unfortunately, they have gone so far and have lost so much credibility that I'm not sure that's even possible anymore. Just sit and watch CNN for even a few minutes, and you will see the extent to which they've thrown out journalistic impartiality in favor of full-fledged anti-Trump fervor. Most recently, look, for example, to the fact that they ran chyrons at the bottom of the screen describing the recipients of the mail bombers' packages as, quote, Trump's targets, close quote. They posted those chyrons even before the alleged perpetrator was apprehended. They would no doubt defend themselves by arguing that it's an accurate description because the recipients of the apparent pipe bombs were individuals who were the recipients of some of President Trump's harshest criticisms. To that I have a simple response. Could you ever imagine CNN during the Obama administration describing recipients on the right who received such devices as Obama's targets? We don't even have to go back that far. As I noted earlier, in October, letters containing ground-up castor beans, which tested positive for the deadly poison ricin, were sent to President Trump, Secretary of Defense Mattis, and a suspicious package containing a white powdery substance was sent to the office of Senator Ted Cruz. Where were the CNN chyrons describing the recipients of the mailings as Maxine Waters' targets or the Angry Left's targets? You won't see them. You'll never see them, because CNN has moved that far to the left. They will post the chyron, which, without actually saying it, implies that either Trump wanted his political opponents to receive the explosive devices, or he was somehow responsible for them receiving those devices, without ever making any showing of an actual causal connection between the president's statements and the illegal conduct. Make no mistake about it. CNN posts such messages because its left-wing viewers feed off of it. Notwithstanding the fact that CNN is in the distant third place, after Fox News and MSNBC, CNN is apparently satisfied to go the route of satisfying its left-wing customer base rather than trying to stake out an actual position as the moderate news outlet devoted to objective journalism. Oh well, maybe at some time in the future the priorities of CNN will change. I'm just not betting on it. Incidentally, not all of the things that CNN has done which undermine its journalistic credibility have been in the arena of politics. Do you remember when Flight MH370 disappeared? Don Lemon actually asked his panelists the serious question whether Flight MH370 could have been swallowed by a black hole. Really? At that point, what's the difference between CNN and Alex Jones? Only that Alex Jones wouldn't have phrased it in the form of a question. If CNN was as bad back then as it is now, I wonder what my father would have been listening to at a volume so loud that when I drove up I could hear it in my car even before I reached the house. Cheers? Miami Vice? Family Ties? I got it. Magnum P.I. Good theme song, great setting, Higgins was a fun character, and hey, Tom Selleck is a Republican. I'll take it. Next topic. The scariest development for the long term that happened this week and received little coverage. So what exactly happened this week that has such scary implications for the long term but received very little coverage? Well, it didn't happen in America. It happened in Europe. The European Court of Human Rights upheld an Austrian woman's conviction in a Vienna court for disparaging religious doctrines. She had said in 2 seminars that the Prophet Muhammad's marriage to a 6-year-old girl, which was then consummated when she was 9 years old and he was around 50, was akin to pedophilia. Per Fox News Online's October 26 edition, in an article by Lucia I. Suarez-Sang, her exact statement was, quote, "What do we call it if it's not pedophilia?" Close quote. The article noted that the woman argued her comments fell within her right of freedom of expression and that religious groups must tolerate criticism. She also argued her comments were intended to contribute to public debate and not designed to defame Muhammad. Per the article, the European Court of Human Rights concluded that the Austrian court's conviction of her, quote, served the legitimate aim of preserving religious peace, close quote. The article noted further that, quote, the court also said the woman's comments were not objective, failed to provide historical background, and had no intention of promoting public debate, close quote. The headline of the article cuts to the issue. It is titled, quote, "Defaming Muhammad does not fall under purview of free speech, European Court rules," close quote. If you combine this ruling with the evidence in polling that the millennial generation is not particularly supportive of free speech rights, and in fact views what it labels as hate speech, which among many millennials is an extremely broad category, as not subject to free speech protections, and then finally with the ACLU memo that I talked about in Episode 4, Everybody Knows It, you see why I'm concerned. The memo basically described an approach where if certain speech undermined ACLU goals, then they might not support the speaker's right to engage in it. If you combine the European Human Rights Court's ruling with the millennial views on free speech and the evidence that the ACLU may be stepping away from full protection of free speech rights, you should arrive at the same conclusion as I do, which is that there is reason to be very fearful about the future when it comes to the question of whether our free speech rights will continue to be upheld. As I've noted in prior episodes, in the 2016 election, I added fears about whether we were at risk and are at risk of losing our free speech rights to the list of reasons on which I base my vote in presidential elections. This latest development on that front reinforces my conclusion that we're at risk and that protecting our free speech rights should be among the most prominent reasons supporting our choices in federal elections. What choice will you make next week when I release the next episode of Political Spirits? Let's hope you choose again to join me for more discussions and perhaps some additional lobbying stories. Until then, be sure to tell your friends about Political Spirits and follow me on Twitter at Franklin Rye. Like me on Facebook at Political Spirits. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.